President Trump backs down from his 48-hour ultimatum on Iran. Iranian media denies engaging in negotiations, but the U.S. is citing talks to reach a complete and total resolution. So with a midnight deadline to destroy Iranian power plants postponed, is diplomacy actually working behind the scenes? And if so, is it in step with Israel's position to continue the fight? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Following good and productive conversations with Iran, the U.S. has said it will postpone strikes on Iranian power plants for 5 days. Nearly a month into the U.S.-Israeli declared war, this admission of diplomacy feels like a breakthrough, but Iranian news sources say talks are not taking place. It's hard to reconcile that with Trump's claims that Iran wants to make a deal badly. Well, whatever the state of negotiations, the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, effectively crippling energy supply chains. And though oil prices have fallen in the past hours, the global economy is still in a state of shock. Here's a look now at where the conflict stands.
It's a deadline that had the world on edge up until nearly the last minute. On Saturday, the US president gave Tehran just 48 hours to allow shipping safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, warning that failure to do so could trigger strikes on Iran's power infrastructure. Iran responded with threats of its own, promising that power plants in regional countries that hosted US bases would be legitimate targets. But on Monday, the US president, posting on Truth Social, said that the US and Iran had productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution on the hostilities.
They want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal too. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
The shift in tone may have the world breathing a collective sigh of relief. But it's not a ceasefire, merely a postponement. Iran has also disputed President Trump's comments, saying there have been no discussion and the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. The consequences are already being felt beyond the region.
To put it simple, the war has been going on for around 20 days plus. And out of these 20 days, the world has received zero supply of oil for 4 days. Just think about this. It's not like minus 10%, it's not 20% less, it's zero supply for 4 days.
The International Energy Agency chief warned that the fuel disruptions were already historic in scale, and worse than 2 separate oil and gas crises in the 1970s.
So the situation is, if we want to put in a context, this crisis, as things stand now, 2 oil crises and 1 gas crisis put all together. And, if I may, not only oil and gas, some of the vital arteries of the global economy, such as petrochemical, such as fertilizers, such as sulfur, such as helium.
Energy infrastructure across parts of the Gulf have been hard hit, with ports, terminals and transport networks disrupted by waves of Iranian attacks. That doesn't even factor damaged civil infrastructure, homes and death tolls within Iran. Despite the shift in rhetoric, Donald Trump remains famously unpredictable. And without a ceasefire, the conflict and the risk to global energy markets continues.
Well, joining me now to share her view from the Iranian capital is assistant professor at the University of Tehran, Satare Sadeghi. Satare, thank you so much for joining us. Just begin, if you can, by giving us your thoughts on the U.S. postponing this deadline via talks that Iranian media say didn't even take place.
Well, I think probably your audience and the people in the world have heard about TACO. Trump always chickens out, and this is another example of TACO. And of course, it comes in the way of the lies that he also always puts out, saying that there have been very constructive talks, which Iran totally denies. There have not been any direct or indirect talks between the United States and Iran since the U.S. and Zionist regimes war on Iran has started. It is only because Iran seriously and strictly warned that if there is any attack on Iran's power and energy infrastructure, Iran will respond and the entire region will experience a blackout. And since Iran has carried out every warning that they had given before this war and during this war, and they carried it out very strongly, it seems like Trump has already backed down and has changed his ultimatum and he's buying himself time. But also, he's also trying to manipulate and control the oil prices because after his statement, we are seeing that oil prices have dropped a little bit again, which is his way of manipulating the market for a while and buying himself time until he can try his other options in order to open the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, then speaking of those other options, I mean, yes, you can say if you believe it's the case that Trump chickens out, but you also know he can change his mind. So are you scared he will change his mind and in lockstep with Israel become even more aggressive with their attacks on Iran?
That's totally possible. I mean, we do not rely or trust his words. He attacked us, he and the Zionist regime attacked us when we were doing negotiations. We were in the middle of negotiations 2 times over the nuclear issue, and when they attacked us. So they're not for peace. They can be very aggressive. We have seen what they did to Gaza, to Palestine. But I think he's reconsidering what the consequences might be for his so-called allies in the region. But I think it's still possible. I mean, he has vowed to destroy Iran as a nation, and he has been engaged actively in killing more than 1,500 Iranians. So the numbers are actually much higher by now, and there are a lot of people under rebels.
Okay.
He has tried to attack our infrastructure. He has destroyed UNESCO World Heritage sites in Iran. So it's totally possible from him, but he also needs to avoid getting even deeper into the swamp he has created, into the war that he has created.
I mean, having said what you just said about, children being killed, cultural sites being attacked, Satari, how are you personally feeling in Tehran now, especially knowing he could change his mind? And is there a feeling really of just being overwhelmed, or do you feel that this actually brings Iranian people, as we've heard in some cases, together in resolve?
I mean, it does, and it has. You can see images of millions of people taking out to the streets across Iran every single night ever since the war started to show support. And we are seeing people who, for example, participated in the January protest, wanting to leave the camp and joining Iranians, patriotic Iranians in support of their countries. We're seeing so-called opposition figures now being worried that Iran's infrastructure and ordinary civilians being targeted. This is basically what we were expecting. I mean, we are dealing with a genocidal terrorist organization in Tel Aviv, and then an imperialist power that has sought to bring down nations into their knees. But we're also seeing that Iran, for the first time in history, is showing the imperialist power that a nation can resist. I mean, it's very destructive. It's painful. It's not easy hearing fighter jets flying over you, hearing explosions every single day, being worried about your loved ones,
it can't be easy,
seeing
indeed.
the images of the civilian areas
totally
Satari, destroyed. This is very, very difficult.
I apologize. The clock is against us as always. So I have to ask you this, because you brought up those January protesters. And in the middle of all that's happening actually right now, your deputy judiciary chief actually said today that it will proceed now with implementing the sentences of convicted anti-government protesters. The government has called those people traitors, infiltrators, as well as mercenaries. Do you fear now that that could serve as a reminder to the many Iranians who were not happy with this government and wanted to see it gone in spite of this U.S.-Israeli action?
It's not about like anti-government protesters. It's actually a lot of people who did have very legitimate grievances against the economy and took part in the strikes and the protests have now understood how the January riots were a second war. Like the 12-day war in June was the first war. That was the second war against the Iranian nation and Iran as a civilization, as a nation. And this is the third war. I'm hearing from many of the protesters that they now see how this was, a prelude to what we're seeing, the total, killing of Iranian civilians. And let's also remember the sentences are not for protesters that did not take part in violent acts against the police officers. These people who are being sentenced and receiving sentences are the people who killed security officers and police officers, more than 300 of them, many of them unarmed. And that's why the people understand in any country, if you attack security forces and police officers, you very likely not even survive the scene. There's no trial, there's no sentence for you because the police will react immediately in order to establish order and security for the entire nation.
Satare, so unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because that's all the time we have for this segment of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank you, as always, so much for being with us and sharing your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get additional perspective and analysis now. And joining me from London, Iranian-Canadian blogger and media researcher Hossein Darakhshan. He was also imprisoned in Iran's Evin prison for 6 years. Also joining us from the British capital, former senior advisor at the U.S. State Department and visiting fellow at King's College London, Nega Anga. And from Cairo, senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies, Dr. Helyar. Thanks all so much for being with me. Dr. Helyar, I'll just start with you. Let's go back to why we're actually on this program now, and where did this sudden, and I'm putting in quotations, diplomacy actually come from, and who is speaking to whom? Because we know Iranians' news agencies are saying there is no communication with the United States. We just heard it in the interview previously from Tehran. What's going on?
Thank you for having me on the program. I think it's clear that something is going on, but I don't think it's what Washington is presenting as such. There's obviously mediation going on using, I think, Egypt, Qatar, and the UK to pass messages back and forth. But I don't think that that's terribly new in the sense that there would always be second, third, fourth channels. The question is how serious they are. And does it involve any direct communication between the United States and the Iranian regime? And thus far, we don't see that. On the contrary, we see the Iranians putting out messages denying that any of this is taking place. Of course, the Iranian regime itself also indulges in, how should we say, presenting false facts, to put it very mildly. So it's entirely possible that there are talks going on. But I don't think so. I think that the Iranian regime has made it very clear that they intend to continue in this war until they can exact a price from the United States and the international community to be able to guarantee that strikes on Iran will not happen again. I confess I'm not sure what sort of guarantees they could ever rely on. But even if the United States called it quits today and decided that they were going to stop striking Iran, I don't think that would mean that the regime in Tehran would accept it.
Yeah, so quickly, I mean, to simplify it, is this good news at all or not?
Well, any step that leads towards a de-escalation, I think is good news. I think is very good news. But I'm just not sure how we can assume that anything is going to come out of it in the short term. I hope that something does come out of it because, of course, the cost of escalation, the cost of this war is wrought not on the United States primarily, but on the region, the peoples of the region, of course, the people of Iran, without making any excuses or apologies for the rather appalling regime that rules over them. But it's the people of Iran that pay the price. It's the people of the Arab Gulf that pay the price. It's the people of the region more generally. And then, of course, wider in the international community when it comes to energy prices and the supply of oil. So I think it's good news if we see any steps towards de-escalation. I'm just not convinced that we're going to see anything bear fruit in the short term.
Negah Angal, judging from your facial expressions, it looks like you mostly agree. So, I mean, are Iranian leaders trying to save face, in a sense, by denying that they've engaged or stooped to engage in any form of negotiation with the U.S.?
I mean, look, I think all this right now is tactics, and there's a lot to read into the tactics to be able to be responsive to your domestic audience, to the international community. I think what we should sort of take into account right now is that we're in what is a tactical pause. It's creating more space for a diplomatic window. It's obviously not a breakthrough, but it's pausing the strikes on, power networks, be it in Iran from the U.S.'s perspective, or Iran targeting power networks in the region, at least for the next few days. And so I think, the key point that we should take away of what's sort of transpired over the last 24 or so hours is this pause reduces this immediate escalation risk that we were all very concerned about. And it in some ways, in practical terms, it provides an off-ramp for President Trump, who can sell this now as sort of a shipping and energy stability if he can get it. And I think that's where we are right now, is seeking potential off-ramps.
Yeah, that's what is so difficult to ascertain here, because, Israel still says the fighting will last for at least weeks from now. I mean, do you think the United States and Israel are on the same page, or has President Trump perhaps taken too much heat domestically for fighting for a foreign country and now wants to maybe forge his own path?
I think what has been very clear is that the U.S. And Israel have had divergent views in terms of the end goal. And that's sort of what's playing out right now, is what would essentially the end goal be for Iran. I think right now the United States is heavily focused on essentially where we are with this economic strangulation that has occurred and that could continue to occur. In the U.S. domestically, the American public right now is focused on potentially the midterms. They'll be focused on their pocketbooks. And as the rise of prices at the gas pump, or whether it's the rise of prices for food, and the sheer fact that this war is going to cost about $2 billion a day, has an impact in terms of how President Trump is going to operate and stay within this conflict. So I think they are functioning in lockstep. It's just their end goal, and we're probably at that halfway point of what this war could essentially evolve into.
Okay. Hossein, if you don't mind, I'd like to actually go back to the interview you had listened to prior to your panel now. And the fact that we heard our guest in Tehran say that actually what's happening is Iranians uniting. Even those January protesters are now kind of standing in solidarity with regime supporters because of what's been done here. Do you see that as the case in Iran? I mean, has it backfired against the U.S. to that extent that those who would have even tacitly supported U.S. and Israeli action against the regime are now uniting uniting in favor of the regime itself?
Yes. Thanks for having me. I think to a degree this is happening on a daily basis. And the reason is, if you compare it with the public mood in Iran after the summer war, the summer Israeli assault, I remember that very, very quickly, many people who were even in the opposition took the same stance of, rallying around the flag, the usual term, and they started to unite to defend Iran and to oppose the assault. Unfortunately, the January incident, which I think was a trap, was a very clear Israeli trap that Iranian authorities fell in, was designed to prevent this unification again if there was going to be any other assault, which was planned, obviously. And it was going to be probably earlier or later, whatever, but it still ultimately happened. So the beginning of the new round of assault, I think the unity was completely shattered as a result of the January killings. But then gradually I'm feeling that the more time, as time goes by, and also as the violence is rising to include many more civilians, many more civilian infrastructures, and then some basic aspects of how any state can run and can govern, I think the unification of Iran is happening again, slow, probably with a slower pace than the summer war, but then this war is taking longer as well. So I think every day we would see a percentage of Iranians who have been critical are sort of uniting in defense of their homeland.
Okay, and that's incredibly dangerous for the U.S. and Israel, because they really, we were at least under the impression that the one card they did have to play was a public that was majority dissatisfied with the regime, and they've handed that card over, it would seem.
Also, I have to add that part of that was manufactured by themselves. I mean, part of the pro-war Iranian diaspora was exaggerated and manufactured by themselves. And that obviously didn't really exist. And now we can see there are cracks in it as well.
Okay. Speaking of cards Iran might have to play, Dr. Helya, it's been mentioned as well that, you know, Iran should not be underestimated because it hasn't even utilized the full power of its so-called proxies. The Houthis, for example, are laying rather low right now because if they proceed again to fully destabilize Red Sea shipping routes, where would that leave all of us and the global economy and Iran's leverage here?
Thank you. I'll get to the Houthis, but just one comment on what you just said about Iranian public opinion. I don't think we should underestimate the feeling within Iran among Iranians vis-a-vis their government. The fact that they're not coming out to protest against them, especially after all that happened in January, doesn't signify that they've suddenly become pro-regime. And this is very common across authoritarian states, not simply Iran, but across the world. The cost of going out to protest can be very, very high. So the absence of it doesn't indicate very much. I will say also that that doesn't mean that they're cheering on some sort of war against their country. There are many choices in between. When it comes to the Houthis have been holding back. There are many different explanations that are floating around as to why. One explanation is that they haven't received the directive from Tehran in that regard. It can also be because they don't want to be drawn into a conflict that they're not convinced would be to their benefit. It might be that they're waiting until the closing of Bab el-Mandeb would have maximum effect. There are a number of different explanations, and I don't think anybody really knows. But I do think that it's something that's on the minds not just of the Gulf countries, Saudi in particular, but also in Egypt, different parts of the Middle East that really rely, not wholly, of course, but quite significantly on free maritime trade that goes through Bab el-Mandeb.
Okay.
I don't know when we can expect that the Houthis will jump in, but I wouldn't put it off the table at all.
Okay. And Nega Anga, there's also the issue that some have argued is that the real winner in all of this is Russia, because now sanctions are being loosened on its energy supplies, and in turn, a stronger Russia can potentially make a stronger Iran. since that is one of its partners, as many would say. Where does that leave, the U.S. and Israel in this if inadvertently a stronger Iran comes out of this?
It's definitely a real challenge. I think both Russia and China, winning at the end of the day, so to speak. But I think it's a little too soon to tell right now. I think if the United States is able to find an off-ramp to exit quite soon before there's more shipping and an energy instability, then there may be a path to be able to salvage a situation where you don't have a more powerful Russia. That said, there are concerns too. We've been seeing quite a bit of reporting that Gulf countries have been quite concerned with this recent conflict and how vulnerable they were left with housing U.S. bases and facilities, what kind of protection the United States was able to provide to their civilian infrastructures, and needing to diversify their security apparatus, their security partnerships. So there's quite a bit of factors at play right now, and something that the United States is going to have to actively work through. But I think it's a little too soon to tell how Russia and China will benefit over the coming years. I think there's a bit of a couple weeks of a sweet spot that we're going to have to decide.
Okay. Hossein, quick final words from you then on where you see the end game here.
We've now reached, I think Trump has reached now almost his plan, the A, B, C, D, E, F, maybe E, F, G, because all the previous plans have been unsuccessful. So I think at some point he would give up the idea of opening the Strait of Hormuz, and also any other plan that he's been thinking and maybe planning. The military has been planning for him the options such as the capture of Khark Island and all that. So I think once he realizes that is not doable, I think that's the end.
Okay, that will have to be the final word. For this edition of Newsmakers, I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.